It is my pleasure to introduce to you our keynote speaker, who is here with his wife, Mary, Mr. Larry Kirby.
No. Thank you very much. Please be seated. I'd first of all like to do a sound check. Officer in the blue shirt, can you hear me? Okay. Usually when I speak, I do not use a microphone. I'd rather get down close to the people. And I don't speak from prepared remarks. I've just come here this morning to have a conversation with you about Veterans Day. And first of all, I'd like to thank each and every one of you who came here this morning to honor the veterans who have served our beloved country. And as Mr. John said, I did enlist in the Marine Corps in 1942, and I served until Christmas Eve 1945 when I returned home to my family. I had been gone for 3.5 years, left home, never came back. And it was a long time ago. My war, World War II, has already receded into history because most people didn't live in that time. They have no real recollection of those activities, and they only know about what they read. But I remember every day of the time I served. It's embedded in my mind. I remember everybody with whom I served. And I especially remembered in my mind, my friends who didn't survive the war. In my platoon on Iwo Jima, we lost 22 young men were killed there. And every morning I visit all 22 of them in my mind. I see their faces and I review them. I love them. They were my brothers. I still cry for them. I miss them. And I will never, ever forget them. But as far as being a combat Marine back in that war, we were trained and we were sent down to the Pacific Islands to take part in the various invasions. And looking back, it was when a young man left the safety of his ship and climbed down the cargo net to get into a landing craft and go to the beach. He knew in his heart that there was a very good chance that he would die on that beach. And still, they went. And the young man, when he goes and attacks the beach, he really only brings two things: his emotions and his training. The emotions run the gamut all the way from bravery to outright fear. The uncertainty of what is going to happen to you in one of these landings is an overpowering fear, and you have to fight through it and still do your job. It takes a lot of courage, actually. And I personally had a little edge because when I finished my basic training at Parris Island, I'm sorry, I have a little cold here. When I finished my basic training, I was selected to be a reconnaissance scout. And you servicemen, the MOS is 0321. And I received training that lasted for over a year, actually 13 months of training. I went from up to Camp Lejeune, where I went to advanced infantry training. I went to special weapons school. I went to communication school. I went to reconnaissance scout school. I was trained as a sniper. I went to the West Coast where I received more training. I received training in camouflage. I could camouflage myself so that I would disappear if I were in the foliage. I was so very well trained that I felt confident that I could do my job and I could survive. Because I know, looking back, that the young man who goes into combat without proper training, that young man will die. There's no question about it. Your training carries you through the hard times. And on Iwo Jima, I was with Easy Company, we now call it Echo Company, of the 2nd Battalion, 9th Marine Regiment. That was a terrible battle. Some historians now say that Iwo Jima was the bloodiest battle involving American troops since Gettysburg. In my particular company, we landed with 320 young Marines. And less than 3 weeks later, 20 days later, we were relieved and taken back to the beach. And there were just 7 of us left standing out of 320. And I wondered then, and I wondered for a long time, why was I spared? And I looked at the other 6 fellows that got out of it with me, and Captain Schmidt and the gunnery sergeant had come to us from the Marine Raiders. Marine Raiders were the creme de la creme of the Marine Corps. They were the special ops guys. They were the most trained people we had. And I was a platoon sergeant. We had 3 sergeants that were still alive, and they were former paratroopers. They had been trained, a lot of training, and you servicemen know what I mean. They had received excessive training. And a corporal who was also trained. And all 7 of us had been in all 3 campaigns, from Bougainville, Guam, Iwo Jima. So we had experience, and we had training. And I think I was lucky to survive. But one of the elements of my survival was the fact that I was well trained. And that training went beyond learning to march or field strip your rifle or something. We used to have practice runs and training procedures where we would have to develop tendencies and also overcome natural tendencies. I'll try to give you one example so you know what I'm talking about. We had a course that we used to run through the woods, a little path, and you'd be running, and people were firing over our heads. And partway down this course, you come to a tree, and you have to go around the tree to continue on. And the instinct is, for all of us, is to go around to the right, because when we drive, we're on the right-hand side of the road. When we go into a public building, you go over to the right side and take the railing. When you come to a revolving door, you push the right side. We're all right-handed. So the instinct is to go around the tree or the obstacle on the right-hand side. The enemy knows that, and he will have his rifle zeroed in 30 inches above the ground on the right side of that tree. And anyone that goes to the right side will get shot. So we had to practice and practice to overcome a tendency to go to the right and always go to the left. That's just a small example of training we had. It was in-depth, it was creative, and I really think that training helped me to survive and to be here today when so many of my comrades didn't make it. And back then and today, I feel that to a very large extent, I owe my life to the men who trained me. When I was at advanced infantry, special weapons, whatever school, there were 3 or 4 NCOs that trained me to do what I was supposed to do. They never left Camp Lejeune. They stayed there for the entire war. They trained people to go and fight, but that was their job. And And I remember when we were going through special weapons, we were learning to fire a 30 caliber Browning air-cooled machine gun. And you're familiar with, that's the standard machine gun. It's on a tripod, and it's got a barrel with the holes in it, and you cock it with the bolt lever on the right. And I remember when I was learning to fire that weapon, that I had to follow my traces to get it on target. There was a youngster there, he was probably 18, 19 years old, from Idaho. And for some reason or other, every time he fired his machine gun, he hit the target. He was born to fire that weapon. The sergeant in charge came over to him and he said, "You're the best student I've ever had. You're a natural in firing this machine gun." And this kid said, "Well, when I get over there and I start fighting the enemy, I'm going to raise hell with my machine gun." And the instructor said, "Son, you're not going anywhere." The next day he was promoted to corporal, and he became an instructor. And he taught his skills that he had with that weapon to hundreds of other Marines. And in doing so, he literally saved hundreds of lives without ever leaving North Carolina. So the point is that when you go into the service, you raise your hand, you take that oath, that's a solemn oath, in which you swear to do whatever you are told to do and do it to the best of your ability. And you obey all lawful orders. And well, I'll go back to World War II. There were 16 million Americans under arms. 1 million were in combat. That means for every rifleman or every sailor that manned a gun or every pilot, there were 15 people in support of that person. Those 15 people were essential to his success. If they didn't do their job, that man with the rifle or flying the plane or on the ship would die. He had to be properly trained and ready for his job. The people who trained him, in my mind, were just as important as the people who fought on the front lines. And on this day, Veterans Day, I desperately want to get that message across to you of the great admiration I have for anybody who ever served his country, because they gave of their part of their life. They gave years of their life. They gave time, thanklessly gave it to their country. And I think a very good example of support is in the Marine Corps, the toughest Marines were the paratroopers. And these guys were really gutsy. They would go up in a C-47, carry a 40-pound pack that have the helmet and their weapon, and then clip onto the static line. And in the dark of night, at midnight, they'd go to the door of that plane and jump out. Parachutes would open, hopefully. But the one person that they really admired was the parachute rigger. He's the guy that never went into combat, but he had a skill for packing parachutes, and his job was to rig the parachutes. And if he didn't do his job right, every one of those paratroopers, many of those paratroopers, would die. Their chutes wouldn't open. It's just, that's an example I want to use to show you that the success of the combat soldier depends on the men and the soldiers who support him. The armors to make sure that he has the right, his weapon works. The ordnance man to make sure he has the right caliber round, the right powder in his ammunition. And for that reason, I would like to say that today, Veterans Day, is a day in which we thank all veterans for their service, not just the combat veterans. Because I know I served in combat, and I look back and I realize that those non-combat instructors were probably the people that saved my life, and I thank them. So I don't want to talk too much longer because it's a long day, but I would like to ask anybody who has ever worn the uniform of the United States in this audience to stand. Thank you. I'd like you to know that I, for one, salute you, and I thank you with all my heart for your service to our beloved country. You're my heroes. Thank you.